But good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be doing a webinar on ArcGIS Business Analyst from location analysis to operational action. My name is Jameson Quisenberry. I'm a project manager at Blue Raster. Joining me today is Chris Messerich and Summers Cleary from our GIS team. Today's webinar is going to be focused on how organizations are using ArcGIS Business Analyst to answer business questions, evaluate opportunities, and ultimately make better decisions. So rather than spending 45 minutes walking through software features, we are going to focus on how practical workflows function within Business Analyst. We'll start with understanding a market, moving into evaluating opportunities, and then show how those resources and results can be shared through applications and tools that people can use on a day-to-day basis. So whether you're involved in site selection, economic development, planning, or customer analysis, the goal is going to be usually the same, turning that location intelligence into something actionable. So we're going to move on to slide 2. And before we jump into some of those demos, I want to do a quick look into what we're going to cover today. So we'll start with a brief overview of business analysts and where that fits within your organization's decision-making processes. Then we'll talk about how organizations are using location intelligence to move from a business question to a recommendation that they can actually act on. And then from there, Chris is going to walk through a couple live demonstrations. We'll look at market analysis, trade areas, demographic data, points of interest, and site evaluations. And we'll actually walk through and show suitability modeling that can help rank opportunities based on those factors that matter most to your organization. And then after that, we'll look at how those results can be shared through dashboards, applications, reports, and other operational tools. And then we'll wrap up with a few real-world examples, some of the audience poll questions that we have for you guys, and we'll leave plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So what business analyst actually does. So when people hear business analyst, they often think about retail site selection. And while that's definitely one of the more common use cases that we see, it's really just one piece of the platform that you can use it for. At its core, business analyst helps organizations combine their own data with demographic, customer spending, segmentation, and market analysis to help answer some of those data questions and location questions that they have. So what are some of those questions and what do they look like? So where are our customers? What does the market look like? Where and which locations are best fit for us? Where should we invest our resources? And how do we communicate those findings with stakeholders? The platform itself includes tools like that help with trade area analysis, market analysis, site evaluation, suitability modeling, reporting, and so on. But the real value isn't necessarily just creating the map. It's helping somebody make a decision. So the final deliverable is oftentimes a report, a dashboard, or a ranked list of opportunities that goes into an application. So the format will likely change over time, but the goal will stay the same. And that's turning the questions into an actionable recommendation. So, but before we move on, we'd like to learn a little bit more about you guys. So we are going to share a word cloud for you all to participate in. So the first question is going to be, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about location-based decision-making? So I'll go ahead and launch that right now and give everybody 20 or 30 seconds to basically respond. We are definitely getting some good word here. So thank you guys for sharing. I'll leave it open for maybe another 10 or 20 seconds. All righty. Well, thank you, everybody. I am going to go ahead and poll and close the poll right now. It looks like we have some great responses here. That's definitely going to help us when we're going to go through the Q&A at the end, as well as potentially some follow-up after the webinar. So let's go ahead and move forward with the next slide, Chris. All right, so business analysts and beyond. So today's demonstration, we're going to be using commercial site selection scenarios and how those workflows apply to a wide range of industries. So the pattern is going to be more or less the same. Define the service areas, understand who is there, compare some of the alternatives, and then share those results. So I know we have a slew of people on the call today from various different sectors, and I'm going to highlight a few here. So for the healthcare organizations, that means identifying underserved populations as well as understanding some of those gaps that may be there. For some of those economic development groups, that may mean evaluating redevelopment corridors and investment opportunities. And for nonprofit and public agencies, that could mean determining where services could expand and where resources may have the greatest impact. So the questions may change, but again, the workflows remain remarkably consistent. And one of the reasons we see business analysts being adopted across so many industries is because it's so useful across all those industries. Next slide, Chris. All right, so we're going to go into some of the proof of the practice. So to reinforce that point, we wanted to show a few real-world examples of how Blue Raster is helping these concepts and servicing some of our clients on a day-to-day basis. For Darsana Capital Partners, we're supporting portfolio scale market evaluations as well as helping to assess opportunities across multiple geographic markets. For CD1 Price Cleaners, we've developed a repeatable market analysis workflow that actually supports expansion and planning and site evaluations across multiple states. For Sunflower Foundation, we've helped build the Kansas Health and Hunger Atlas, where demographic and community data can be used to support nonprofit and health initiatives across the state. And then finally, for OC Works, those location intelligence support some of the workforce development and access to service initiatives that they're trying to do across Southern California. And all of these organizations, they all operate within different industries, but the common thread is still the same. Enrich the geography, compare the options, and publish that information so that people can act on it. And that's really just the core value of what business analyst is. So we are going to pivot to some of the demos, and I'm going to pass this over to Chris.
Thank you, Jameson. Yeah, before I hop into the business analyst platform, just wanted to set the stage a little bit here, giving you an overview of what we're going to cover. So I have two business analyst focused demos. The first one, we're going to be creating a project, bringing in a map, creating some sites and some travel areas, and talking through like how do you decide what travel area you should create, ending with an infographic and a report, and then also turning to some of the other built-in tools in the web application. Then once we've got a better understanding of our existing sites and bring in some candidate sites, we're going to walk through the steps of a suitability analysis and dive into that tool a little more in depth. Then we're going to transition to the experience builder, just showing how the analysis that we do in business analyst doesn't necessarily need to stay in business analyst. It can move throughout the ArcGIS platform. So with that, I'm going to switch my screen over here. And can you see this shiny infographic?
Yes.
Yep. All right, great. So this is just a little teaser for what we're going to be creating. This is a business analyst infographic. Think of it as a snapshot about one site that we've been evaluating. I'll dive into this a little bit further, but just wanted to show you what we're working towards. So now we're going to go over to Business Analyst web app. So inside of this tool, you can do a lot of different things. We're not going to be able to cover everything, but we're going to start with how to actually create some maps, create some infographics, make some sites. So the first thing you should know is that you can add data if you are a current ArcGIS, if you currently have an ArcGIS subscription, then you probably have made a web map, you've experimented with some data, you can immediately import that from your ArcGIS Online organization. If you don't have a web map, you can bring in a spreadsheet or a shapefile. You can also bring in some data from the data browser that Esri provides. So can just bring in a quick web map here from my content, and you'll see that I have this demo base map here. And I've already added it because sometimes I want to do a little cooking show and just bring it in. So here is our web map that we added from our content. And in this scenario, we're going to be working with Green Fork Market, which is this fictitious cafe that I decided to found in the DC metro area. We have 4 locations, one in Capitol Hill, one in Arlington, Alexandria, and Bethesda, Maryland. So the first thing I'd want to do when thinking about site expansion is, I guess, creating these sites. So the way you do that is with your layer, you can do setup layer. So you select setup layer, and you can see the 4 features that are a part of our existing stores are located here in this panel. One thing to note about Business Analyst is whatever you see in your map extent is what is available for you to manipulate. So that sounds vague, but what I mean by that is if I zoom in so that Bethesda and Alexandria are out of my map extent, they don't appear in the list of places that I could create sites. So if you're thinking, wait, I'm missing a site, just try zooming out, and then your features will update accordingly. I'm going to use the store name so you can see Alexandria, Arlington, Bethesda, and Capitol Hill. And then this brings you to your first critical decision when you're creating trade areas, whether it's, do I want to create buffers or what Business Analyst calls rings? Do I want to do something like a drive time or a walk time? Now, this ultimately comes down to your business and your operational practices, where you think your target market for each existing location or candidate location is coming in from to, use your services, your products. But this logic of I want to focus on the area closest to me, I should probably use a walk time. Versus if I have like a larger coverage area, like if I was a hospital or like a community health center or something like that, I might be focused more of a drive times rather than walk times. So I'm going to make the decision to do 5, 10, and 15-minute walks, and then I can set up my layer. I can zoom into one of these and you can see how these boundaries have now been drawn. And then we can create an infographic here, and we'll select from our layers, and you can see this little cute walking guy symbol here. We'll select these 4 walking times, and then you'll be presented with different infographics to choose from, as well as classic reports. If you need to add additional sites, you can always do that. And then for infographics, Esri includes 20 plus infographics standard out of the box. If you want to take a peek at any of them, you can hover over this second icon and it'll show you what that template sort of looks like. For our example, we're going to choose the community summary here. And then you can run side by side, run them individually. You can export them as PDFs or HTML files or Excel files. We're going to run all of these side by side, and it's going to look pretty hectic for a second. Let's give it a second. Look at all of that incredible information. That's a little bit overwhelming. To make this a little simpler, they have a drop down here where we can turn off some of our sites that we don't need to investigate currently. But now we could actually compare the difference in population statistics or growth rates from a 5-minute to a 10-minute to a 15-minute walk. If you hover over each of these, it'll show you like where the data is coming from, the definition of the data. We can scroll down and see what other metrics are included here in this community snapshot. And this is really helpful for being able to compare across sites, not just within one site. So you could actually compare, a 5-minute walk around Alexandria to a 5-minute walk from Arlington. And you can see how these statistics will differ. So from a quick glance, like this can be really useful getting some feedback from somebody in the meeting here. Mute, thank you. So you can see how with this, with these infographics, this could be really helpful when you're sitting in a conference room discussing like, should we go to site A or site B? Being able to compare 5 minutes of one site to 5 minutes of another site. So I'm going to close our infographic example here, go back to our map, open up a little layer list here. So the next thing I wanted to show you were some other built-in tools. We have color-coded maps. So what this is really helpful for is being able to map a single variable of your choosing to any geography that you're interested in. So I'm going to clear my map for a second of our store buffers, and we can clear that. So if we were focused on the Arlington area, and we wanted to understand something like total population, then I could select the geography and then choose my map extent as my area of interest. And then you can see the different granular levels of geographic data that we have access to. So most demographic variables are actually captured at the block group level. And we could choose something like total population. And then we could see these differences in total population at the block group level in our map extent. We could see the top 5 and the bottom 5 block groups based on that population. There's a nice histogram built in here if you need to do some statistical analysis, as well as drilling into this in a tabular view. Going back to variables for a second, this is probably the most appealing part of Business Analyst is just the sheer volume of data that you have access to. So there's 10,000 plus variables inside of the platform. Very wide-ranging subjects. Like you can see these categories on the left-hand side here. We have everything from income and population down to like psychographics and behavior, like whether somebody voted in the last 12 months in a local election. And then my favorite thing right now is looking at the 100+ variables that are in some way related to the World Cup, because I'm sure some of you have the Switzerland game playing right now. So just in case you're wondering, there are 100 variables for the World Cup out there. Okay. Then once you've decided this is the variable that I'm interested in, you could spend some time playing around with the styles, right? Just like you would in ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. And then once you've decided that that's how you want the layer and the information styled, you can save this out as an individual layer that you can then bring into other ArcGIS applications or maps. Great. And then the last thing I want to show you in this demo is the points of interest search. So this is a question that we get pretty frequently when working with commercial clients, as well as like nonprofits, is I want to know about what's in my area, like how many cafes or hospitals or my competitors, where are they located? So Esri has built in this nice little points of interest search. So for Green Fork Market, which is a cafe, we could always search for cafe locations. And we could see that within our current map extent, we have 88 different point locations. We can view them here, like Aura Cafe and Aroma Cafe. We can see some information like their location, what's their NAICS code, their industry description. There's also typically amounts of employees, sales volumes. So there is some business intelligence data that you can get out of the points of interest search. A lot of information is packed into these tables. And again, like our color-coded map, once we've narrowed down exactly the points that we need, we can save these layers out to an individual web layer and then bring this into an additional application. All right. So with that, I'm going to switch gears over to our other map. We have our existing stores. We also have our candidate locations. These could be created by talking to, brokers, your location intelligence partners that help you find potential sites, your own research. Once you have your candidates and you have your existing locations, you probably want to do a suitability analysis to figure out where of these candidate sites is most similar to our best performing sites. So We often help people do this, and the way we do that is with this suitability analysis tool in Business Analyst. So you select the tool, and then you're going to select the features on the map that you want to evaluate. We'll choose our candidate sites. And now we've been launched into the tool where we're going to show our site names. So we have 10 candidate sites loaded into our map. And just like we created our trade areas for our existing sites, we're going to create a 10-minute walk around each of our candidate sites. So we will create our sites. You can see all of our 10-minute walks have been created. We'll hit next. And now we can decide the analysis criteria. So this is where we spend a lot of time working with our clients, really diving into what variables matter to their business, right? We're not going to understand your business better than you. So we work to really understand, like, what are the top 10 things that you think contribute to your business's success? What demographic trends are important to you, whether that's population or population growth or income, or back to those very niche and specific variables, like if somebody's watching the World Cup in the last 12 months. We spend a lot of time going through and making a list, ranking that list, weighting that list. And then once we've decided that these are the variables that we're interested in, we'll do some enrichment. So for this example, we're going to choose the popular, population, and income, which is 4 variables: total population, annual growth rate, daytime population, and median household income. So we'll select these 4, and then we can see that off the bat, our 10 sites have been ranked. Now, this default styling is a little confusing, so let me go ahead and change that. We're going to change our color ramp to go from red to green so that red sites are not great and green sites are great. So you can just keep that in mind. Going back up to the top here. The next thing we think about when we're doing a suitability analysis is the influence, like the direction of the raw variables themselves, right? So in our hypothetical example, we're interested in finding places that have more people, more growth, higher income, and more people around during the daytime. So we can leave each of our input variables as having a positive influence. Next section, we have our scoring method. So some people like to visualize their final score on a metric of 0 to 1, others 0 to 100. But we spend most of our time discussing weighting. So this comes down to, right now, we're equally weighting our 4 variables. But if through discussions we find that we actually should be focusing more on one variable than another, then we can increase the weighting of one variable. And you can see how our rankings in our table here, as well as on the map, are changing dynamically. So this is where the iterative part of the process comes in, like dialing this in to help the map match our expectations of what we're seeing in the field. So if we're happy with these weightings, then we can hit done. And then something that a lot of people bring up is, what about competitive pressure? So you can add additional criteria. So if you wanted to add additional variables, like more than the 4 that we have, you can always do that. But we also have the ability to add a point layer for competitors specifically. So we can take our competitor locations that we could grab from the points of interest search, and we can add those into our map here. So once we add in these competitors, these counts of points, we're going to set an inverse influence. So meaning the more competitors within the trade area, the worse that site would be rated. And we can see you could actually change that from distance to nearest point or the total number of points. There are lots of ways of slicing and dicing the competitive pressure. And I definitely encourage you to explore the different ways you can configure that. And then most importantly is, once you've come up with your index, you're satisfied with all of the variables that are going into it, it all makes logical sense to you, then again, like our other layers, you can save this out as an operational layer to use in future applications or other maps and apps that you're making. And with that, I'm going to switch over to our experience builder. So the reason we threw this experience builder together was to really focus on just highlighting this idea of our analysis doesn't have to live in business analysts in perpetuity. We're able to bring in our existing stores, our candidate sites, our competitors that we were just looking at, as well as those 10-minute walks that we made for our existing stores and our candidate stores, as well as our suitability analysis outputs, right? So then you can really start to build that story and help the rest of your team understand the impact of your analysis. They don't have to become a business analyst expert to really understand everything. You can build a lightweight application like this and send them the link. And then all of the hard work that you did in business analyst can be easily understood in something like this. And then if you wanted to continue the work, then we also have a business analyst widget inside of Experience Builder. So in this example, if we zoom over to our example site over here, I can select this dropping a pin sort of tool, drop a pin right here. We map out that address. We can also create a walk time. You can change this to the rings and the dry times if you so choose. And then we can choose an infographic, just like we were doing in Business Analyst. So we're going to select the community summary and then run that infographic. Boom. And then we can see the same thing that we were seeing in Business Analyst, but in Experience Builder. All right. And then I know that AI is at the top of people's minds recently. So I just wanted to hop back here and talk about where that stands in Business Analyst. So if you notice in the top right corner, there's this Business Analyst Assistant. So Esri's been working on these assistants in different web applications as well as like desktop. And what the purpose of this one is to help take natural language and make structured queries out of it so that you can do the three things that we were really looking at that I did manually, right? So if you wanted to map income, like a single variable, a color-coded map in a specific location, then you can just type that as a query and directly see that. If you needed to see a report or an infographic, you can do that really easily, as well as search for points of interest. So there are some suggested prompts in here. I definitely encourage people to experiment with the AI assistant. It can definitely help speed up some parts of your workflow. And with that, I'm going to switch back to our PowerPoint and then wrap this up. So we think that good suitability analysis starts with the right variables, meaning that we spend a lot of time thinking about finding authoritative and defensible data, choosing useful variables that don't inflate one another or conflate one another. We try to document all of the assumptions that we're making, thinking about what variables can be used as proxies for other ones. And then how does all of this information tie together to tell the story of our business is trying to solve X, Y, or Z question, and this index, this suitability analysis, is the result of that pursuit of trying to answer that question. And again, like I was saying earlier, business analyst doesn't have to be siloed. The results that you get out of it can be put into dashboards, experience builders, other configurable applications, as well as the stuff that you bring in can come from a variety of different sources, whether that's your own proprietary data, external connections with, regrid data like parcel, property context data, as well as things that are coming into the fold more recently, like Placer.ai or Salesforce or Power BI integrations. And Jameson, I feel like you probably have something to add here as well.
Yeah, I'll just kind of piggyback off of that is that our goal is usually not to keep this within business analysts like Chris had mentioned. It's to help organizations like yourselves to take those insights and generate them and optimize them to what works best for you. So like we talked about, whether that be including parcel or property data with providers like Regrid, including some of that mobility or visitation data through Placer.ai, or integrating a lot of that into like executive dashboards that you can put into Power BI or Salesforce or whatever CRM you're using. A lot of times we just see business analysts becoming the analytical engine in the middle of that much larger workflow. So we're happy to help you guys out or talk through what that'll look like, because oftentimes business analyst is just the start of something much, much bigger. And that kind of opens up a little bit to the implementation path. So when organizations begin exploring business analysts, like I'd mentioned, they oftentimes start at various different levels of maturity. Some are evaluating licensing options and trying to determine if the platform kind of meets their needs, while others already have the licenses and they just need to build some repeatable workflow or decision models that help them out. And while some are already ready to operationalize some of their analysis through applications, dashboards, and integrations, Blue Raster, we typically support those clients on all three areas. So we can include helping and defining business questions through success criteria. We can configure those business analyst projects, incorporating custom data sets, building some of those suitability models, and then creating the reports and the infographics off of those. But it ultimately enables the teams through either training of the dashboards, the experience builder applications, and some of the ongoing support to kind of get to where they want to go. The overall goal is still the same, and I kind of go back to this throughout the webinar, is we want to turn this into a powerful analysis tool that is repeatable for whatever you guys are looking for and what that capacity might look like. Next slide. Yep. And then if there's just one takeaway from today's webinar is that you don't have to have everything figured out to get started. Many of the organizations that we come across have the main business question of whether or not this works for them and what that technical requirement might look like. So they know that they're trying to identify growth opportunities. They know that they're trying to improve service areas, evaluate markets, or support a lot of their planning decisions. But they're not always sure what those tools and data and workflows might look like and what they need. And that's perfectly okay. So at Blue Raster, we can help everything from the Esri licensing to the business analyst portion through the setup and the integration of the custom data. We can support some of that suitability and modeling, as well as some of the training and application development through Experience Builder, Dashboard, or some of those third-party integrations that we just talked about. And then we can help with some of the reporting of those workflows. So our recommendation is always pretty simple. So start with the business question, and we can help you map out the right solution. And so from there, we'll pivot to some poll questions, because this will help us better understand what you guys see, what was useful from the webinar, and it'll help us kind of build out for future opportunities, as well as better understand where you guys are coming from in terms of, some of the things like what describes your role today, what your organization uses GIS and intelligence mapping for, what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys are dealing with? And then obviously the last one is going to be kind of where you want to go after this. So I'll go ahead and open the poll now. You're going to see 4 questions. They're going to be on the screen as well. So Chris can kind of siphon through those, and we'll take a few minutes to let you guys answer those. They are multiple choice, so it's not just one answer. You can pick as many as you want. And I'll just kind of be quiet and let you guys do your thing.
We are going to jump to Q&A discussion in a few moments, so stay on the call. Thank you.
And obviously, these poll questions are going to be the end of the conversation and the webinar in terms of what we'll be showing to you. So hopefully the business analyst portion was kind of helpful for what you guys were seeing in terms of just creating maps and what it's useful for. And then like Chris mentioned, we're opening things up for Q&A here in the last 5 or 6 minutes. So as you guys wrap up some of the questions, I'll keep it open throughout the duration of the webinar, and feel free to shoot off any questions you might have in the chat or the Q&A session. It looks like we do have a couple questions coming across the Q&A portion. So I'll go ahead and speak to Parker's question of, do users of Experience Builder need BA analysts or licenses to access the BA widget and Experience Builder? In most cases, no. End users can interact with the business analyst widgets embedded in the Experience Builder application without having to have the business analyst license alone. So there are some considerations. So whether you're doing like an app creator or something like that, it does require some of the privileges that come with BA, but the licensing itself is fine. You don't need the additional licensing. I would say a good rule of thumb is if you're consuming some of the results in the experience, typically you don't need that BA license. And then if you are creating some of the new analysis, that's where the license will come in. And speaking with some of the account managers across Esri, they recently switched it up this year to where if you do have a creator license within ArcGIS Online, the BA web does come with that. So a lot of times you don't even need the additional license. You can have that $700 creator license, and that gets you going with some of the BA web stuff that you're looking to do. And then I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I see a question about creating custom infographics in Business Analyst from Richard. Yeah, to answer that, custom infographics and custom reports require the advanced license for Business Analyst web. I forget the exact naming of it, but it's the advanced one. So you have the standard license with any creator or above in ArcGIS Online, for ArcGIS Online. So yeah, the tier above that, then that unlocks the custom infographics and reports. It's pretty cool. I'll say that. Like, you can put in images, your logo, your own styling and branding. And then probably most importantly is you're not limited to the standard variables that are baked into the templates. Like, you can create your own variables, whether you're like dividing one field by another field or like truncating part of a statistical data set. You can do a lot. So it's definitely worth it for a lot of reasons. And then there was another question here about suitability analysis, find top scoring points that don't already exist on an analysis layer. I'm going to try to answer this based on the way I'm understanding it. I'll just say that in the example we were looking at trade areas, which are polygons. You can do suitability analysis like on a point layer outside of the business analyst platform. So meaning, like, if you have points, you could then make the trade areas off of the points and then do the rest of the workflow in business analyst. But if you just had points, then you'd need to create some sort of polygon associated with them. Just because the way it scores, it's evaluating like polygons against one another. I hope I interpreted that question correctly and gave you a good answer.
Yeah, and then it looks like we only have a couple minutes left, but there is one question from Carolina. She's asking about how we integrate Placer.ai into the GIS workflows. So that kind of depends on how and what type of API access or options you're looking at. But yes, you can integrate that. I know Esri's been doing a lot of work in progress with that over the last several months. So at a high level, it depends on what you want the Placer.ai to do. So if you're looking at foot traffic, trade areas, customer journeys, or some of like the competitor demographic visits that you're looking for, you can use that API access to get the exports that you need from Placer.ai. Oftentimes it refreshes relatively well, so you can use it within ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Online, and then that filters into Experience Builder dashboards, and then you can use the business analyst to do that. And then there are oftentimes, I don't know how often Placer.ai refreshes itself. I imagine it's fairly live or automated, if not, monthly updates. But in terms of integrating it with Esri, you can use a ton of stuff with it. We've taken a look and done a lot of stuff with customers as it relates to like the geography that they want to analyze. So whether it be like specific sites, parcels, some of the trade areas, I think some of the zip codes and census areas is obviously a big one. And then oftentimes people end up doing custom polygons off of that, and then we kind of, refresh and do a lot of the business analyst stuff that we talked about today. So it typically can be a little bit of a manual export if you're not integrated in some of the automatic pipelines, but it's something that we're seeing more and more, and we're happy to have that discussion with you.
And I see maybe this is the last question from Chris Urchel, asking about use cases, case studies about interactive dashboards where there's a multi-view of both a map and table or chart, and selecting one view interacts with another view, maybe like a drill down. So yes, we have quite a few examples of that, where selecting something on the map selects it in the table. You might have related records to the record that's in the table. So yes, that is a very common practice. So there are multiple tools across dashboards and Experience Builder and instant apps, like a bunch of Esri products that can allow you to do exactly what you're describing, whether you're familiar with it in Tableau or another platform. The capability is definitely there. So we'd be happy to show you something. Just reach out. All right.
Well, perfect. I know we're at time. I appreciate everybody that has stayed and attended the webinar. We will be sending out the YouTube link after this shortly, so everybody on the registered list should be able to get a link. So if you missed a little bit of the first part, there is some recaps there, and then obviously we'll be reaching out to thank you and see if you want to have a follow-on discussion. But we truly do appreciate all the time and effort you guys have put in to join us today, and thank you again.
Thanks,
I hope
everyone.
everybody has a wonderful day.